Consider this punishment for giving me orders." On the deserted beach at midnight, I was left behind by Michael. The car that abandoned me sped away into the distance. I had asked Michael to take me to the hospital upon receiving news that my mother had suddenly collapsed. Yet here I was, suddenly left all alone. With the shock and sadness of Michael's betrayal, tears wouldn't stop flowing. It would probably take close to 3 hours to reach the hospital my mother was taken to from here. I started walking determinedly with my face a mess of tears and sweat. Why do I have to endure this kind of treatment? The days I had spent with Michael came back to me, but as I walked, I could feel myself gradually regaining composure. At the same time, the sadness of betrayal began to turn into anger. "I will never forgive you. I'll make you regret doing this to me for the rest of your life." Swearing revenge on Michael, I kept walking relentlessly towards the hospital. My name is Lauren, a 47-year-old office worker. Since I was young, I've had difficulty interacting with people, so after graduating from university, I started working for a computer-related company. My parents raised me strictly, and I was good at studying from elementary school because of that. On the other hand, being quiet meant I was often looked down upon, and at some point, I came to prefer being alone. Living while being considerate of others stressed me. That was enough to tire me out. I didn't have anything particular I wanted to do in high school or university, but I went on to further education just as my parents wanted. While everyone else was enjoying clubs and mixers during my university days, I had a lackluster 4 years. However, I did make a few close friends during my time at university. One of them was a classmate named Stephanie. Stephanie and I attended many of the same lectures, which naturally led us to talk more. At first, Stephanie was as modest and discreet as I was, but as we progressed through the grades, she began to change. Her clothing and makeup became gradually more vivid, and she started to hang out with the kind of people I wasn't comfortable with. Yet, Stephanie still treated me the same as when we first met, adapting her approach to suit me. The Stephanie I saw around campus was always with different men, seemingly a completely different person from the one I knew before. Nevertheless, I was thrilled that she remained friends with me. After graduation, we continued to interact, going out for meals and playing regularly. I had several friends from university besides Stephanie, but none of them had a good impression of her. I don't want to speak ill of Lauren's friend, but be careful around Stephanie. She's not what she seems. That was what they all seemed to agree on. My relationship with Stephanie changed around the time we both turned 43. Stephanie suddenly asked me if I wanted to join her at a mixer. Just the word mixer made me weary, and I indirectly declined the offer, but to my surprise, Stephanie was also still single and wanted to organize the mixer to find a marriage partner. I had no experience with men at this age, and I couldn't even contemplate starting a relationship with someone now. I'm not up for a mixer at this point in my life. I said this with a laugh, but Stephanie answered seriously. I want to start thinking seriously about finding a partner too. There won't be any frivolous people like before, so don't worry. Concerned that I had been watching her male relationships over the years, Stephanie emphasized that this was a chance for a serious meeting. Moved by her enthusiasm, I decided to accept Stephanie's invitation. But there's no guarantee this will lead to a meeting, right? And there's no telling if there will be someone I click with. I was worried about embarrassing Stephanie, the organizer, but she was happy that I decided to participate. A few days later, the promised day arrived. I arrived at the meeting point 30 minutes earlier than the designated time, having dressed up in an unfamiliar fashion for this day. Feeling bewildered by the crowd around me, I waited for the time to come when a man approached me. "Excuse me, are you attending Stephanie's dinner party by any chance?" The man who spoke to me was petite and youthful looking, easily mistaken for someone in his 20s at first glance. He turned out to be a friend of Stephanie's and said he was attending through that connection. His name was Michael, and he was just 2 years younger than me. His hair was dyed bright, and he looked a bit flashy, but his way of speaking hinted at sincerity. I felt an odd sense of kinship with Michael as he laughed about being nervous and arriving early. Eventually, everyone arrived, and the dinner began. I spoke with the other man, but my eyes kept following Michael. "Lauren, you like Michael, don't you?" Stephanie said this to me, as we both stood up to go to the bathroom at the same time. After that, Stephanie helped us exchange contact information. I wondered if I was just being carried away and if I would be a bother to him, but Michael agreed happily. "Let's go out to eat again." Stephanie seemed disappointed that she didn't find a compatible man at the mixer. I apologized many times just for myself, but she dismissed it with a smile, saying, "Why are you apologizing?" Later on, Michael and I went out to eat several times and started dating. Having zero experience with men at this age feels like a burden. I said this many times, but Michael would hug me gently in response. 3 years passed, and when I turned 46, Michael proposed, and we decided to get married. I still couldn't quite grasp the reality that I had gotten married and led a somewhat floaty existence. Michael worked in sales at the major cosmetics company, but we gave up on the idea of having children, considering our ages. I decided to continue working and support Michael's life. However, about half a year into our marriage, Michael's behavior began to change. The once kind Michael started to hurl insults at me. "You're so damn noisy. Why do I have to be considerate of you all the time?" Michael kicked the trash can and chair around the room in anger, but after a while, he calmed down and began apologizing while crying. He would mention, among other things, how busy he was at work and how stressed he was due to pressure. I listened to Michael's troubles and stayed by his side until he calmed down. I felt bad consulting Stephanie, who had helped us get together, so I kept the escalating problems with Michael to myself. Taking advantage of my silent kindness, Michael's behavior got progressively worse. He rarely came straight home after work, often returning late at night. When I worriedly asked for a reason, he would only lash out, saying, "You're so damn annoying." I wondered if all men were like this. Lacking in relationship experience, I questioned Michael's behavior but felt helpless about what to do. Amidst this, a friend from my university days came to visit my home. "That's definitely not okay!" As I spoke of my married life with laughter, my friend responded with a serious face. "But he's usually kind, you know. After he gets upset, he apologizes." My friend shook her head in disbelief, saying, "I'm astounded." "Michael is taking you for granted because you don't say anything. If this continues, he'll do whatever he wants with you, and it'll be too late to fix anything." However, Michael had never been physically violent to me. Every day he works hard. Surely it's fine if he lets off some steam before coming home. If I nag him too much, I worry that Michael, who married someone like me, might start to resent me. I gave my friend a light response and started to wonder if there was any fault of my own. A few days later, I decided to bite the bullet and discuss my married life with Stephanie. I told her about Michael's late returns and his tantrums and verbal abuse when he's in a bad mood. "That's really normal for men. He's probably just saying that because he's jealous of you." Stephanie's response was exactly what I had hoped for. Everyone has some troubles in their married life. Michael chose me of all people, and I wanted him to live as comfortably as possible. It was just a matter of me being a little more patient. Grateful to Stephanie for listening to such worries, I resolved once again to strive to be a good wife. Life with Michael remained the same, but following Stephanie's advice, I played the role of a good wife with even greater patience than before. It happened late one Saturday night. Both Michael and I had the day off that day, and Michael had been out gambling since morning, returning home the past evening. As usual, he seemed to have lost quite a bit, and I could tell he was in a bad mood the moment he opened the door. Trying not to provoke him, I focused all my nerves on not doing anything that might irritate him as I interacted with Michael. Despite my efforts, Michael still shouted at me for things like dinner being late or the bath being too lukewarm, and he went to sleep late at night after venting his anger. Once the raucous Michael quieted it down, I could finally relax as well. Being careful not to make any noise that might wake Michael, I started to watch the drama I had been looking forward to, streaming it online. However, I must have been exhausted. Before I knew it, I had fallen asleep on the sofa. The next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by my smartphone, set to silent mode, buzzing violently on the desk. Oh no! If Michael had woken up before me, I would be scolded again. In a panic, I grabbed the smartphone from the desk to check the screen, and it was just past 1 in the morning. It wasn't the alarm that was vibrating my phone, but a call. My head was still groggy from sleep, but the name displayed on the screen instantly woke me up. Dad? The word father displayed on the screen sent a flutter through my chest. A call at this hour of the night surely meant something was wrong. I answered the phone, convinced it was terrible news. Is that you, Lauren? Your mother collapsed when she got up to go to the bathroom earlier, and I called an ambulance. We are at the hospital now, getting her checked out. My father's voice over the phone was clearly agitated, losing its usual calmness. Anyway, I need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible. Panicking, I asked for the location of the hospital and hung up the phone. I hurried to get ready, and when I reached the front door, I realized I cannot drive a car. With the time being what it was, there was no public transportation available. Considering it was an emergency situation with his mother-in-law, surely Michael would be willing to drive me if I woke him up. I rushed into the bedroom where Michael was sleeping and shook his body. Michael! Michael! At my call, Michael grumbled unhappily. So noisy. I told the grumpily writhing Michael, who kept his eyes closed, that my mother had collapsed. Hurry up and get the car out! Losing patience with Michael, who kept squirming in bed no matter how much time passed, I raised my voice. Then, with a light click of his tongue, Michael finally threw off the comforter and got up. Yeah, okay. Still in his sweat, Michael grabbed the car keys and walked briskly towards the car, leaving me behind. I'm really sorry for this time of night. Once I got in the car, I told Michael about the hospital where my mother had been taken and apologized to him repeatedly. Both of us were silent. The car drove towards the hospital on the deserted road. When we reached the coast where the sea could be seen on the left hand, Michael suddenly stopped the car. Sorry, can you buy me a coffee from the vending machine over there to help me wake up? Being made to drive at this hour after being woken up, he must not have been fully awake. Silently nodding, I opened the car door and jogged toward the vending machine. Let's see, Michael can't drink black coffee, so something sweet would be better, right? After pressing the button for the sweetest looking coffee, just in case, I also pressed the buttons for a less sweet and a cafe au lait. Michael opened the car window as I took the cans out of the dispenser and turned around. That's what you get for ordering me around. I thought Michael was shouting at me, but then the car suddenly sped off. I couldn't understand what was happening while staring dumbfounded at Michael's car speeding away. What had Michael said through the open window to me? Punishment for ordering me around? Standing in front of the vending machine with a can of coffee in hand, I was bumped into by insects drawn to the light of the machine. For a while, I couldn't grasp the reality of what Michael's words meant and the situation I was in. Were those words really meant for me? Was it some kind of joke? But then, recalling the emergency with my mother, I almost unconsciously started walking along the coastline. Blown by the lukewarm sea breeze, I just kept walking along the deserted coastline. Walking helped my panicked mind gradually regain calmness. Michael had left me behind. He lied about wanting coffee just to get me out of the car. He had left me here on purpose, with full malice. I have loved Michael and believed in him since I met him, but doesn't he love me? That can't be right. After shouting at me, he usually apologizes kindly, and he's always nagging about things for my sake. I was so rushed that I ended up wearing sneakers barefoot. My feet, rubbed raw by the shoes, began to throb with pain. Michael's betrayal and the pain in my feet made tears flow from my eyes before I knew it. Why? Why is this happening? Memories of my time with Michael raced through my head. There was worry for my mother, but the sadness of being betrayed by the first person I ever loved was overwhelming. With tears flowing ceaselessly, I still kept walking. It was only now that I realized I had left my smartphone in the car. My husband left me alone in the middle of the night in a deserted place, unable to call for help. If he truly loved me, he would have come back to help me immediately. If he would come back now and say, "I'm sorry," and hold me, I would forgive everything. Michael must have noticed the smartphone in the car seat long ago, but there's no sign of his car returning. With a messy mind and face, I continued down what seemed like an endless road. It's impossible to tell how much time has passed, but finally, when the feeling in my tired legs started to fade, I could see the hospital in the distance. Upon entering the premises, I found the after-hours entrance and gave them my mother's name. My feet were terribly sore from walking for so long. Emily Johnson. Upon hearing my mother's name, the security guard made a call somewhere and then kindly opened the inner door for me. I was bewildered after passing through the door, but soon I heard footsteps approaching from the other end. "Are you Mrs. Johnson's daughter?" The nurse who appeared around the corner checked my name and then took me to the waiting room where my father was waiting. In the corner of the dimly lit hallway, there were several chairs lined up, and my father stood in front of them, looking restless. "Lauren, what on earth have you been doing until now?" Upon seeing me, my father was shocked to see me sweating and dragging my feet. Seeing my father, I sighed deeply and collapsed onto a chair. Then, as calmly as possible, I explained to my father what had just happened in the order it occurred. "What is he thinking?" My father, usually a gentleman, frowned and started to show his anger at Michael's treatment. It had taken roughly 3 hours for me to get from our home to the hospital. The anger and disappointment towards Michael were great, but I was more worried about my mother's condition. My father, initially shocked by the terrible state I was in, eventually told me about my mother's situation. Fortunately, my mother had regained consciousness about an hour before I arrived at the hospital, and she was now resting in the intensive care unit. Neither Michael nor I could be reached by phone. My father had been quite worried that something had happened to both of us. While talking to my father, I could feel my affection for Michael cooling off rapidly. When I got home, I decided I would make things clear to him today. The discomfort I had been feeling until now was correct. I felt miserably stupid for being at the mercy of such a man, and I finally woke up. I decided to break up with Michael and waited for my mother's condition to stabilize. As my father and I sat waiting in the hallway chairs, his mobile phone began to ring. Yes, I see. My father had a surprised look on his face as he answered the call, but then he nodded and listened for a while. "If that's the case, both my daughter and I are here." After hanging up the phone, my father turned to me and began to speak. "It seems Michael has been brought here." I let out an involuntary noise and stared into my father's eyes. The call was from the hospital, informing that soon after I arrived, Michael had been urgently transported here. It appeared that after leaving me behind, Michael had brought liquor and returned home. He had gotten drunk, caused a stir, fallen down the stairs, and was found by the paramedics in a bloodied state. Before I could even begin to worry about Michael, I was just astounded. He had left his wife alone in the middle of nowhere at night, and this was the result. Knowing that his mother-in-law had been taken to the hospital, he calmly had a drinking spree. I felt pathetic and embarrassed to have lived with such a man. I heard that Michael had been treated and taken to a hospital room. I imagined that as soon as he saw me, he would start ranting. "It's all your fault." Even though I used to love him so much, now all I can think about are his unpleasant traits. It's embarrassing to be thought of as that man's wife by the hospital staff. With heavy steps, I went to the reception desk, asked for Michael's room, and then visited it alone. Michael was lying in the bed, his head and body wrapped in bandages. When he saw me enter the room, anger flashed in his eyes and he opened his mouth to speak. Despite his miserable state, it was clear he was trying to use me as an outlet for his stress. "Where the hell have you been? I'm in this state because of you. It all started with you." "Let's break up." Before Michael could finish his complaints, I cut him off with those words. "What?" Lifting his upper body in the bed, Michael was stunned. "I've finally woken up. Did you think everything will always go your way? When you are in a bad mood, you throw tantrums like a child, crying and wailing." Looking down at Michael, who couldn't move, I unleashed years of pent-up frustration upon him. "You've been cheating too, haven't you? I'm ashamed to have married such a pitiful man. Truly ashamed." As I raised my voice, a clear look of fear appeared in Michael's eyes. "Michael!" Suddenly, a woman burst into the hospital room. When I turned around, it was Stephanie standing there. Stephanie! In that moment, I understood everything. Stephanie and Michael had been having an affair. Thinking back, when I discussed various things with Stephanie, she said, "Men are like that," trying to force me to agree. I couldn't help but laugh. Stephanie's eyes widened in shock, and she frantically started to repeat, No, it's not like that." "Stephanie, don't you realize you've been fooled by such a pathetic man? You really are pitiful." I glared at them both and started walking toward the entrance of the room. "Goodbye, but don't think this is the end of it." I stopped and turned back with a smile, adding those words. The next day, my mother was recovering well, but she was advised to stay in the hospital for observation for a while longer. After seeing my mother and feeling relieved, I immediately returned home to start packing my belongings. Michael, unable to move yet, was forced to stay hospitalized for the time being. Betrayed by both my husband and my friend, my mind was filled with thoughts of how to make them pay. On a whim, I opened the door to the study that Michael had always forbidden me to enter. He probably never expected that I, who always followed his orders, would break his rule. On the desk in the study, there were boldly placed pictures of Stephanie and Michael embracing each other. Really pitiful from start to finish. I took pictures of them with my smartphone camera and then left the house where we had lived together. After returning to my parents' house and leaving my belongings there, I headed to a law office recommended by a friend. The lawyer, skilled in disputes such as divorces, smiled contentedly after I explained the situation and showed the pictures of Michael and Stephanie. "You have evidence more than enough. Both of them will regret this for the rest of their lives." I felt a twinge of fear at my calmness, but I was determined to take revenge. The next day, early in the morning, I received a call from Michael.
"What the hell have you done? I've been fired from my job."
I could visualize Michael crying over the phone. In fact, the day before, I had called his company pretending to be the dutiful wife. "You may have heard from my husband, but I'm embarrassed to say he got drunk, started a fight, and fell down the stairs." "Oh, a traffic accident? No, that's not it." Indeed, Michael had lied to his company about being hospitalized due to a traffic accident. Knowing this, I intentionally pretended to be unaware and contacted his company. I had anticipated the subsequent questioning after they realized the report was a lie. I explained the situation in detail, including how I had been abandoned in the middle of the night and about the affair. As I had aimed, Michael, who was the face of sales at his company, was fired. The company must have thought it was only a matter of time before a man immersed in wrongdoing would harm them. To add insult to injury, a claim for compensation was made against Michael. Stephanie received the same message, and both were now obliged to pay a substantial sum in damages. When told that the pictures left unguarded had become evidence, Stephanie turned her anger on Michael, blaming him continuously. They were two people blinded by desire, but in the end, that was the extent of their relationship. Their attempts to shift the blame onto each other solved nothing. They broke up amidst arguments and lost everything. Michael lost not only his jobs but also had to sell his home. Rumors about Stephanie's misdeeds quickly spread, and she apparently lost her job as well. She called me several times, crying and asking for forgiveness, but naturally, I could not accept it. They would have to spend a lifetime reflecting on the cost of betraying someone. After the divorce from Michael was finalized, I was single again. My life felt like a lie for several years, and the quiet routine of my earlier days returned. Having received substantial compensation from both of them, I took some time off to care for my mother. Indeed, some people might consider going on a healing journey or a trip to mend a broken heart after going through such tumultuous events. But as you reflect on the whirlwind of the past few weeks while resettling in your family home, it seems you are finding solace in the quiet contemplation and the return to everyday life. Mother, having recovered well enough to return home, appears to carry a sense of guilt over the events that led to my divorce. I wonder if all this happened because of me. With a laugh, I quickly dismissed her concerns. No, it was a wake-up call. I'm embarrassed that I ever married such a guy. Still, as mothers often do, she worries about me, repeatedly asking if there is someone suitable out there for me. Friends who've learned of my situation offer comfort but also scold me, perhaps out of protective concern. They repeat that they had warned me about Stephanie multiple times, yet there is a sense of relief on their faces now that I'm out of that situation. This time, you just happen to get tangled up with the wrong guy. You'll find someone good in your own time. While the thought of new love might be too much to contemplate at the moment, I wonder if there will come a day when I'll fall in love with someone else. Having felt for a long time that love is not the only source of happiness, my feelings are understandably mixed. Yet now, I have an unexpected financial buffer that allows me to laugh in the face of adversity, a far cry from the days of walking on eggshells around Michael. Compared to those days, I feel happier now. I plan to indulge in my parents' kindness for a while, living life as I please, and I'm open to the possibility that when I'm tired of being alone, a new and meaningful encounter might just be around the corner. This ordeal has shown me a side of myself that I didn't know existed, the courage to face challenges head-on and overcome them. Yeah, I can do anything now. And with that resolve, I'm ready to take the following steps into my new life.
I chose Emma's favorite chocolate cake for the cake. You like chocolate, didn't you? Mom, if you eat that, you'll die. Catherine quickly swapped my cake with Kevin's. I hesitated and then took a bite of the cake. Catherine started eating her cake too. Kevin was bragging about how he had reserved this cake a month in advance and how the crushed nuts on top were delicious. Suddenly, he began to choke. Kevin's face rapidly turned red. He struggled to breathe, started to froth at the mouth, shivered, and then collapsed onto the floor. My name is Emma. I am 36 years old and work at a food inspection company. I live with my husband, Kevin, who is 2 years older than me, and our 7-year-old daughter, Catherine. I met Kevin at university. We both started working and began dating a little while after that. We got married 2 years later. The next year, our daughter Catherine was born. Catherine was slow to develop. She began walking at 2. We were very worried and consulted various doctors, but nothing seemed wrong. Every hospital said, individuals vary. Let's wait and see. At first, Kevin was very concerned. However, as Catherine neither talked nor walked, he grew distant from her. My mother-in-law, Kay, had also decided that Catherine had a disability, so she disliked and wouldn't even hold her. Only my father-in-law was affectionate with Catherine. He often said she was unique and lovely, and that always made me happy. Before our marriage, Kevin was very kind. But due to issues with Catherine, he was always in a bad mood at home. If something didn't please him, he'd bang on the table, stomp on the floor, or just make loud noises. Every time he did that, I would tense up and shrink back. Kevin's behavior at home stressed me out to the point where I had menstrual irregularities, leading to menopause, and I became unable to have more children. At that moment, I covered myself with the futon and cried uncontrollably. After that, Kevin became more aggressive towards me, constantly complaining about how I cleaned, seasoned our food, and even how I folded the laundry. Every time he complained, he'd bang the table hard or set the teacup down roughly. The loud noises made me flinch, and all I could do was apologize. However, Catherine would just watch Kevin's behavior with a puzzled look and never seemed scared or cried. Kevin would look at her as if she was something eerie. Catherine didn't speak, but she learned letters quickly and was always reading books. She had an incredible focus and could read for hours on end. By the time she was in the senior class of kindergarten, she was engrossed in encyclopedias and children's books rather than picture books. I believe she understood some difficult words by then as well. When it was time for Catherine to go to elementary school, because she barely spoke, it was suggested she might have a developmental disorder and that she should attend a special needs class. When I consulted Kevin about this, he was furious. "Are you kidding me? Why should my child go to a special school?" Kevin slammed a cup onto the table. All I could do was flinch and cower. "Anyway, you figure it out. I won't accept such a disgrace." Kevin stomped off to the bedroom. While I was lost in thought, Catherine gently rubbed my back with her tiny hands. "Thank you." Crying, I hugged Catherine. "Catherine, it's not your fault." The next day, I received a call from Kay. "Are you planning on sending my granddaughter to such a class? If the neighbors find out, it'll be too embarrassing to even walk outside. If that happens, it's all your fault." Kay just said what she wanted and then hung up the phone. Neither Kevin nor Kay were truly concerned about Catherine. All they cared about was how they were perceived by others. After consulting various people, including community counselors, school teachers, and municipal office staff, it was decided that Catherine would attend a regular class rather than a special needs class. The students, parents, and teachers of the special needs class were all wonderful people, and I personally felt that this class would have been a better fit for Catherine. However, since both Kevin and Kay were against the special needs class, I could see that they would strongly oppose it if I suggested enrolling her there, so I couldn't bring it up. When Catherine started elementary school and I had some free time, the company where I had been working as a temp offered me a full-time position. The job was fun and rewarding. Compared to the suffocating atmosphere at home, I cherished the feeling of being needed and relied upon at work. I decided to discuss this with Kevin. As expected, Kevin was hesitant. "My current company has offered me a full-time position. I really want to work there as a regular employee." Kevin crossed his arms in a condescending manner. Make sure you keep up with the housework or even do better than now. But I'll need you to help out a bit too. Kevin glared and banged the table. Housework is a wife's job, right? You're mistaken if you think I should help. After pondering for a bit, Kevin grinned. Fine, I'll ask my mother. She can take care of the house. I was taken aback. Could I bear having Kay, who we barely got along with, coming to our home? In the end, Kevin gave Kay a spare key, and she began coming to our home almost every other day. Whenever Kay came over, it was a constant barrage of snide remarks. You haven't cleaned it all, have you? Poor Kevin having to live like this. How were you raised to clean like this? Since Kay started visiting, I've been even more meticulous with my chores. Yet, she still nitpicks and complains about everything I do. For several weeks, I endured the bullying, but finally, I couldn't take it anymore and told Kay that I would take care of the house properly, so she didn't need to come over. Reluctantly, Kay agreed and stopped coming. However, just as I felt a sigh of relief, Kevin began to frequent his parents' house more often. Kevin always loved his family home, and his visits there increased. After some time, when Catherine was in her second year, my father-in-law, who had always been so energetic, suddenly passed away. He was the only one who was truly kind to Catherine. At the funeral, what struck me as odd was seeing Kevin and Kay occasionally exchanging glances and laughing. Weren't they sad? Certainly, I had no impression that Kay was close with my father-in-law, but to see a mourner laugh during the funeral seemed out of place. With his passing, Catherine lost the only person who was truly on her side. I was filled with anxiety. Despite juggling household chores, childcare, and work, I fell sick from exhaustion. I called Kevin, who was always at his parents' home, to ask if he could prepare the meals, but he flatly refused. Even when my mom was sick, she never asked my dad to do anything. I don't want to catch anything from you. I'll stay at my parents' house for a while. With that, Kevin hung up. He didn't come home for an entire week. As my health improved and work got busier, I was offered a promotion to section chief. I was delighted, but the responsibilities felt heavy considering the state of my home life. I consulted with Kevin, but as expected, he insisted I should properly manage the housework. Moreover, he glanced at me with a mocking look. Can you even handle a section chief position? Title-wise, that's the same as me, right? Kevin left the table abruptly and headed to the bedroom. The next day, Kay came to our house. Kevin mentioned it. He said the house is a mess because you're not putting in enough effort into housework. Kay hurriedly entered our house and began checking everything. How the windows were wiped, how the laundry was folded, the water stains in the bathroom. She made me redo all of these. Whenever Kay visited and started complaining to me, Catherine began speaking to Kay. Catherine approached Kay with a serious face. Grandma, what do you think are the 4 main elements of happiness? What are happy hormones? Taken aback by Catherine's rapid-fire questions, Kay looked utterly bewildered. It's probably been a while since Kay heard Catherine's voice. You can speak normally, can't you? Answer my previous question. Kay, possibly not understanding the question, tilted her head in confusion. Oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, endorphin? Increasingly perplexed, Kay looked at me with an anxious expression. They're neurotransmitters mainly secreted from the pituitary gland in the brain. Lately, Catherine has been reading a lot of medical books. Kay, while being taken aback, listened to Catherine's explanation. Catherine continued to passionately talk about the relationship between neurotransmitters and diseases and substances related to sleep. Overwhelmed by Catherine's focus, a worn-out Kay eventually went home. Thankfully, I was spared from her nagging that day. On my birthday, Kevin, returning from a business trip, bought a birthday cake. It was the first time he had ever bought something for me since our marriage. While he would give Kay souvenirs from every trip and brand-name scarves, wallets, or bags for her birthdays, he had never bought anything for Catherine or me. I was surprised, wondering what prompted Kevin's act. While I was in shock, Kevin showed me the cake box. Thank you for everything. I love you. I'll put this in the fridge. Let's eat it later. I got goosebumps from Kevin's uncharacteristically sweet tone. Catherine, seemingly displeased with something, took a mineral water from the fridge, glanced at the cake, and went to her room. Since Catherine stayed in her room, the two of us went ahead with the meal. Throughout dinner, Kevin kept smiling at me, throwing out overly sweet words that felt insincere. "I'm sorry for always leaving the household chores to you. I'll start helping out more from now on." "Thanks." Kevin's words made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to spoil his mood, so I just nodded along. After the meal, as I began clearing the dishes, Kevin took out the cake box from the fridge. When I tried to prepare a plate and knife, he motioned for me to sit down. "It's okay, I'll handle it." Kevin served the cake on plates and brought them to the table. Honestly, I felt uneasy about Kevin's behavior. "I got your favorite, a chocolate cake. You like chocolate, right?" I couldn't bear being alone with him any longer, so I decided to call Catherine. "I'm going to call Catherine. Please wait for a moment." I hurried to Catherine's room. She seemed to be researching something on an old computer that I no longer used. "Mom, you shouldn't eat that cake." "What? Why? Just trust me right now." Catherine looked at me with an intensely desperate expression, one I had never seen before. Anyway, I decided to trust Catherine. Catherine then took my hand and led me back to the living room. "So, shall we eat? Hey, we don't have forks." Normally, I'd immediately go to the kitchen, but Catherine was gripping my clothes tightly, preventing me from moving. "Oops, I forgot it. I'll get it now." Kevin cheerfully got up from the table. Just then, Catherine whispered to me, "Mom, if you eat that, you'll die." Quickly, Catherine swapped my cake with Kevin's. Kevin, holding a fork, returned and started eating the cake in front of him. "It's delicious, Gemma. A famous pastry chef made this cake." I cautiously took a bite of the cake. Catherine started eating her cake as well. As Kevin proudly talked about reserving the cake a month in advance and how the crushed nuts on top were delicious, he suddenly began to choke. Kevin's face turned bright red, his breathing labored, foam came out of his mouth, he started shaking, and then collapsed on the floor. It looked like an anaphylactic shock from an allergy. Both Kevin and I have a buckwheat allergy, but what we were eating was cake. It shouldn't contain any buckwheat. Confused and frozen in place, Catherine spoke to me in a calm voice. "Mom, call an ambulance." Catherine handed me her phone. Snapping back to reality, I called for an ambulance. Catherine turned Kevin on his side and asked me to hit his back hard. Following her instructions, I hit his back, and Kevin spat out the cake he had eaten. He seemed to breathe a bit easier. Kevin appeared to be in a daze, muttering, "Buckwheat, buckwheat." Even in the ambulance, he kept muttering. Hearing this, a paramedic asked me to stay by his side. I did as told and sat next to Kevin. At the hospital, after receiving treatment, Kevin's life was saved. He was advised to stay in the hospital for a few days for observation. I wondered how Catherine knew something life-threatening would happen. With this thought in mind, I completed the hospital admission procedures and went home. As soon as I got home, Catherine showed me a candy wrapper she pulled from the trash. Dad threw this away in the kitchen trash. It was a wrapper for cookies made with buckwheat flour. Catherine continued explaining. The cake box Dad bought had a seal that was half peeled off. Catherine said when she checked the kitchen trash, she found a candy wrapper she'd never seen before. She looked it up online and discovered it contained buckwheat flour. She then warned me, "Even now, I can't believe the crushed nuts on the cake were from crushed buckwheat cookies." I remembered Catherine's words, "Mom, if you eat that, you'll die," and shivered. If Catherine hadn't acted quickly, I would have been the one eating that cake now. The thought of being the one on the hospital bed scared me to my core. Could Kevin have tampered with the cake intending to harm me? I took out my phone, ready to make a call. I need to inform the police right away. I think it's better not to. Wait, why? Dad was the one who collapsed. If you inform the police, they might suspect you. Catherine's words made everything go dark before my eyes. Indeed, what Catherine said made sense. Informing the police might result in me becoming a prime suspect. A feeling of despair overcame me. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll handle it." Catherine went to Kevin's study and started looking for something. Kevin had told us never to enter, and I really had. Catherine opened a drawer and began flipping through a notebook. "That is miraculous. He must have left something written down." Catherine stopped flipping and showed me the notebook. What was written there was shocking. My father-in-law had been victimized in the same manner. The notebook had buckwheat flour cookies, crushed and pinched, mixed with sprinkles written on it. Furthermore, Kay was involved in this terrifying plan. They were conspiring together. At the bottom of the page, it read next is Emma's birthday. I inadvertently gripped the notebook tightly. "It's okay. Really?" Catherine strained her voice, speaking to me. That's when I realized I was shaking more with anger than fear. How dare they target me after my father-in-law? I swore in my heart I will never forgive Kevin and Kay. I concealed my determination and spoke to Catherine. "This notebook can be used as evidence, right?" Catherine regretfully shook her head. "Unfortunately, it won't. If they just say they wrote fantasies, it's over. Plus, Grandpa's already bones. There's no way to investigate." I looked down deep in thought. "You're right. Without evidence, they can make any excuse." Catherine firmly grasped my hand. "I'll find the evidence. I'll definitely protect you, Mom. Let's send those two to prison." Encouraged by Catherine's words, I nodded powerfully and squeezed her hand back. If they're up for it, so are we. For Catherine's sake, too, I resolved to defend my life and avenge my father-in-law. Catherine and I swore vengeance against Kevin and Kay. Catherine and I began preparing for the final showdown. First, the plan was to lure Kay into our house. I asked Kay to teach me how to cook Kevin's favorite dish, saying I wanted to make a delicious meal for Kevin when he gets discharged from the hospital. Without any suspicion, Kay came over. I disliked every second of being with her, but I endured it as she taught me to cook in the kitchen. Meanwhile, Catherine searched Kay's bag and found the buckwheat cookies. Catherine swiftly took out just one cookie. The next day, I took the cookie to my company and requested a composition test. I never thought that working at a food inspection company would come in handy like this. A few days later, Kevin was discharged from the hospital. I told Kay I was preparing a celebration for Kevin's recovery and asked her to pick him up. While waiting for Kevin to return, Catherine and I prepared his favorite dishes on the table and waited for the two of them. By the time the preparations were finished, Kevin returned with Kay. Catherine went to the entrance to welcome them. Holding Kevin's luggage, she guided them to the table. I made today's dish with Mom, following Grandma's recipe. Kevin happily began eating the food laid out on the table. He also seemed to enjoy her meal. After a while, a puzzled expression appeared on their faces. "Hey, Mom, that thing." Kevin whispered something to Kay and gave her a look. "No way." Kay looked at something on the table, her eyes widening in shock. She must have been truly surprised as she dropped the fried chicken she was holding with her chopsticks. And she didn't even realize she'd dropped it. Kevin and Kay didn't touch the food anymore. I deliberately spoke to Kevin. "Was the seasoning okay? I guess I can't make it as good as your mother does." The two of them mumbled words like, "No, it's not like that, it's delicious," all the while looking down. I gave them my biggest smile. This seasoning not only tastes good but also seems to give energy. My father-in-law told me about it. Kevin and Kay began to shiver as if they were cold. But I didn't care and kept smiling. Catherine sprinkled this seasoning over their rice. Catherine reached out for the seasoning. "Stop it. Don't put something so suspicious into it." Kevin, with a terrifying expression, swatted away Catherine's hand. "Why are you so scared? I just want you and your mom to live longer." I flashed my brightest smile. "Enough, just stop it," Kay shouted with her ears covered. "Why? You wanted me to stay healthy too, didn't you? You sprinkled it on my cake. In the end, you ate it yourself and got hospitalized, though." I presented the two, who looked taken aback, with some documents. I had our company's inspector check this substance. The ingredient on the cake matched the one from those buckwheat cookies. Kevin and Kay exchanged glances when faced with the evidence. What are you talking about? I have no idea about that. The substance from the buckwheat cookies your mom had and the one you threw in our trash, they're from the same product. Do you think it's okay to just go through other people's belongings? And that cookie was a souvenir from a friend's trip. I calmly placed a copy of Kevin's notebook on the table. Then, can you explain why it says here, ordered the cookies online? The notebook had details like the manufacturer's name, product name, shipping date, and price. Kevin and Kay were turning their faces red and then blue. There's also a note here that says if given in a very small amount, it won't be detected if induced to vomit. I stared sternly at Kay. This is related to the cause of my father-in-law's death, isn't it? Kevin, his shoulders slumped, began to speak. My father was an obstacle. Maybe he didn't like how close my mother and I were. He would always interfere in everything, and it was annoying. Exactly. He constantly lectured Kevin and me, saying you two are weird and this isn't a normal parent-child relationship. I couldn't stand it. I mixed the buckwheat cookies into the seasoning and made him eat it. The father-in-law was merely concerned about the unusual relationship between a mother-obsessed son and an over-attached mother. Perhaps Kevin and Kay resented him for it. Their reasons are too self-centered. I felt immensely sorry for my father-in-law, who had lost his life trying to create a healthier family environment. Since it worked with my father-in-law, you tried to use the same method on me, right? That's right. You have the same buckwheat allergy as me and my father. You were also in the way. I was more than angry. I was dumbfounded. What you've done is a crime. I'll report to the police now and submit the evidence. Suddenly, Kevin stood up, snatched the copy from the table, crumpled it, and forcibly swallowed it. Kay, Catherine, and I stared at him in surprise. There, now the evidence is gone. The police will think this is just some delusion for my wife, Emma. Kevin looked down at me and Catherine with a triumphant face. Dad, that was just a copy. The original is in a different location. Catherine said it calmly. Then, she placed a voice recorder on the table. You can't escape now with this evidence. Catherine had rigged an IC recorder under the table and had been recording from the beginning. It's over now. Kevin collapsed weakly into his chair. It was almost over. Just a little more and the nuisance would have been gone. Kay, unable to contain her anger, slapped the table with both hands. You two really thought this plan would work, huh? Catherine said with a look of disbelief. No matter what the plan was, I'd always protect Mom. I took out my smartphone. I'm calling the police. Please admit your guilt and make amends. It's the least you can do for my father-in-law. As I tried to operate my smartphone, Kevin and Kay began to prostrate themselves on the ground. Please, we're sorry. Spare us from the police. We truly are. Yes, we're so sorry. Please forgive us. Kevin and Kay were rubbing their heads on the floor. Catherine suddenly began to explain the method of the crime. Dad is an over-attached mama's boy, right? So a perfect crime is impossible. First of all, you leave too much evidence. If it were me, I would. I hurriedly covered Catherine's mouth. Catherine, please use your knowledge correctly. I looked into Catherine's eyes. She looked back at me properly. Okay, I understand. don't get involved with such people anymore. Also, I have something to report to Mom later. I hugged Catherine tightly. Okay, I understand. From now on, let's live peacefully together. When the police were taking Kevin and Kay away, the two were crying and screaming, and the police had a hard time. Copies of the notebook, voice recorder recordings, and the purchase history of buckwheat cookies found on Kevin's computer served as evidence, resulting in a guilty verdict, including the matter with the father-in-law. After the arrest, by the time Kevin was indicted, my divorce from him was successfully finalized. I received $660 as compensation from both Kevin and Kay. Kay used the proceeds from the sale of her family home to make the payment. Although Kevin had no income to pay child support, the money from the sale of his house was allocated for it. This meant that Kevin and Kay had no place to return to once they were released. With a portion of the compensation, I built a grave for my father-in-law. I wanted to properly mourn for him. After the verdict for Kevin and Kay was announced, Catherine and I reported the incident in front of my father-in-law's grave. I'm sure my father-in-law would be pleased in heaven. After the incident, Catherine showed me a piece of paper. This is the report I mentioned earlier. It was the result of an IQ test. I was surprised and had to take a second look. It says 135 here. My intelligence quotient is 135. I was astonished. I believe a score above 130 is referred to as gifted. I'm sorry I took the test without telling you, Mom. I also used your credit card without permission. I was once again surprised that Catherine could do such a thing. Afterwards, Catherine transferred to a school that accepts gifted children. Though Catherine still struggles with communication and doesn't speak to anyone, she likes the environment where no one minds and she can study what she's interested in as much as she wants. She's happily attending. Living with Catherine has been enjoyable, and my work is fulfilling, making my life feel enriched. Thanks to the vibrancy in my daily life and my improved complexion, people often tell me I look younger. Since we started living together, Catherine frequently gives me hugs. When you do this, a lot of the happiness hormone oxytocin gets released. I still don't quite understand where oxytocin comes from, but it certainly makes me feel happy. And fortunately, my menstrual cycle has returned. Is it thanks to the happiness hormone, as Catherine says? I hope to keep living with Catherine, never losing our smiles.
My in-laws run a screw factory. My father-in-law, Bill, who is the president, and my husband, who is set to be his successor, are arrogant and inept leaders. The factory is actually sustained by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. I invited this family to the diner my mother runs. There, my father-in-law and my husband spewed rude remarks, resulting in my father kicking them out. Still feeling unsettled, my father decided to execute a certain plan for the sake of Megan and Amy. My name is Diane, and I am 27 years old. My husband, Tom, is 3 years older than me. We've been married for a year, but we don't have any children yet. As mentioned, my in-laws run a screw factory. My father-in-law took over the business from his father, and now my husband is set to be the next successor. Apart from them, the family consists of my mother-in-law, Megan, and sister-in-law, Amy. Megan provides essential support in the office, ensuring that the staff can work smoothly. I also work as a clerk, and she has been incredibly helpful to me. Meanwhile, Amy works hard on the factory floor, sweating alongside the other workers. Both Megan and Amy are adored and respected by the employees. On the other hand, the president, my father-in-law, Bill, and vice president, my husband, Tom, have zero trust from the staff. They rarely visit the factory floor, perhaps once a week if we're lucky, and spend most of their time in the office, acting arrogant. Many employees resent these inept leaders. The stabilizing presence of Megan and Amy is immeasurably important. I learned from Megan that Amy has always been a meticulous and hardworking person, gifted with skilled hands. Conversely, my husband is clumsy and fickle, easily giving up on tasks he initiates. Although most employees believed Amy would inherit the factory, Bill chose my husband. The reason? Simply because he thought it's customary for men to inherit businesses. Upon hearing this from Megan, I felt it was ludicrous to let someone without skill or trust take over such an essential factory. The reason I ended up marrying such a man was that I was deceived by his outward appearance. We met through mutual friends. A friend, concerned about my long single status, introduced me to him at a gathering. On the outside, he seemed impressive, passionately speaking about taking over the family business and making their screws internationally renowned. I was attracted to my husband because he looked so cool. It seemed my husband also took a liking to me, as he asked me out on several dates and eventually formally proposed that we become a couple. Half a year later, he proposed marriage, to which I responded with an affirmative okay. When I went to greet his family, Bill spoke passionately about screws, and I could feel the pride he had in his work. They treated us to a meal, and as I was helping Megan with the cleanup, she discreetly asked, "Are you really sure about marrying Tom?" with a somewhat meaningful tone. As I struggled to respond, she hurriedly said, "Never mind. I just wanted to ask." I later regretted not properly addressing her question and listening to her concerns after getting married. What did he mean by internationally renowned screws? He should first learn to be a respectable person in society. On a free Sunday, I got permission from my husband to visit my family home. My family home primarily operates a diner, managed mainly by my mother. My father also helps out during busy hours. On Sundays, the diner only serves lunch, so I timed my visit after their lunch service had ended. My sneaky plan was to get treated to a meal there. No matter when I eat it, my mother's cooking is always delicious, and I often find myself going for seconds, which I usually don't do. After finishing the meal, my mother asked, "How have you been lately?" "Busy." I decided to answer her honestly. "Well, my job isn't that busy, but Megan and Amy seem to be having a tough time. I've been thinking it'd be nice if I could cheer them up somehow." Then her mother suggests, "Why not invite them here? I'll go the extra mile and cook lots of delicious dishes." "That might be a good idea. Your cooking has a healing effect, and I think it would be great for the two of them who are tired. If Diane is okay with it, would you also invite Tom and Bill?" "Why?" "I think it'd be better if it's just the ladies. I want to see just how clueless they are." "I also want to see how they treat you." "Really?" "It seems like they might say something rude." "We have our own ways to handle it, don't worry." "All right, I'll invite them." And so, my mother decided to invite my in-laws to her restaurant. First, I talked about this to Megan and Amy. "Megan, Amy, my mom wants to invite you both to our family restaurant for dinner. Would that be possible? It's a kind offer, but won't we be interrupting their business?" "It's fine. They're closed on Sunday nights. So if you could adjust your schedule, it should work out." "Really? In that case, maybe we'll take you up on the offer, right, Amy?" "Yes, I've been wanting to try your mother's cooking. Isn't it a famous diner in the neighborhood?" "Well, not really famous. But I can vouch for the taste of the food." Having successfully invited Megan and Amy, I next wanted to discuss inviting my father-in-law and my husband as well. My mother said she'd love for Bill and Tom to come too. "Do you think those two will agree easily?" Amy seemed concerned. "I'm worried about that too." However, Megan optimistically said, "If you tell them they can eat delicious food for free, they might just agree." "You think?" "Those two love food and are weak to the word of free. I'm sure they'll agree." Feeling reassured by Megan's words, I decided to talk to Bill and Tom that night. "Bill, Tom, I have a favor to ask." "What is it?" "Why so formal? I'd like both of you to come to my parents' home." "Isn't that where your mom runs a diner?" "Yes. When I went home the other day, my mom said she'd love to invite everyone. Would you like to come?" "What do you think, Dad?" "Sounds troublesome." He didn't seem keen, but as Megan had predicted, he changed his tune when I persisted. On Sunday night, just for us, my mom said she'll cook special dishes. Of course, it's on us. Please come and enjoy the meal. Upon hearing this, Bill's attitude began to change. Isn't that diner quite famous? If you're inviting us so earnestly, maybe we should go. Yeah, Dad. We're being invited, after all. True to Megan's prediction, the word free made Bill and Tom change their minds. Though they acted nonchalantly, saying, "We'll go," I could sense that they really wanted to go. As expected, Megan, having been married for many years, it seems she knows exactly how to handle her husband. And so, I successfully invited my in-laws to my mother's restaurant. The following Sunday evening, I returned to my childhood home with them. My mother was quietly cooking in the back of the kitchen, and my father greeted us. "Thank you for coming all the way here today to accommodate my wife's wishes. The meal will be ready shortly, so please wait a moment." As my father returned to the kitchen after the greeting, my mother stopped her cooking to greet us. "It's been a while, hasn't it? Since the wedding of the two of you? It's good to see everyone looking well." Then, Megan spoke on behalf of everyone. "Thank you for inviting us today. We've wanted to dine here for some time, but the timing never seemed right. Everyone was looking forward to today." My mother, apparently pleased with Megan's words, returned to the kitchen to cook the meal. As soon as she disappeared from view, Bill muttered, "This restaurant and its owner both look old and dirty." I heard his words, and my husband joined in the mocking. "You're right, Dad. I didn't notice at the wedding, but isn't Diane's mother too old? If I knew the restaurant was this rundown and dirty, I might not have come. Yes, eating in such a filthy place might make us sick." Their insulting remarks grew louder, and finally, my mother, who was about to serve the food, overheard them. She placed the dishes heavily on the table. Soon after, my father brought out more dishes. Sensing that they had been overheard, my father-in-law and my husband became restless. "I don't want the likes of you to taste my beloved wife's cooking. Please leave immediately." "How rude. You invite us and then tell us to leave? The rudeness is on your side. Don't think you can insult my wife and get away with it." With that, my father grabbed Bill and Tom by the arm and dragged them out of the restaurant. Closing the door with a sharp sound, he turned to us with a smile as if nothing had happened. "Now, let's eat while the food is still warm." Everyone was stunned by the sudden turn of events. but Megan quickly said, "Let's eat," and a pleasant meal began. Megan and Amy drank and began complaining about Bill and Tom. They're both so useless. We run the factory, and they don't even notice. The employees hate working under them. I wish Amy would take over the company. Don't you think so, Diane? Just as I thought she was complaining, she turned the conversation to me. I agree with you. It's hard to understand why such a competent person Amy is treated this way. She deserves better. Thank you, Diane. I never get used to being bossed around by those two. Because of the two of them, there are still tasks that can't be done efficiently. There are so many things I think I would do differently. My parents smiled as they listened to our complaints. As soon as the complaining stopped, my mother spoke. It was obvious from their behavior earlier that those two are useless. Isn't it time for all of you to take a stand? We'll help you. With a wicked smile, my mother said this. My father nodded in agreement. I had a feeling something was about to change. After the dinner party, things seemed the same for a while. Bill and Tom lounged around the office, doing nothing, while Megan worked hard. My parents said it was time to take a stand, but nothing seemed to change. A week passed, and then I received a message from my father. Everything is ready. You can safely break up with Tom. What do you mean by breaking up? Diane, you and Megan will each get divorced. Amy should just sever the ties between parent and child. But if I leave, what will happen to this factory? That's why preparations for the factory have been made. You don't need to worry about anything. His tone was utterly serious. If he says so, I believe it will be okay. I finished my call with my father and told Megan and Amy. Thus, we decided to take action. That night, I resolved to tell Bill and Tom. Me and Megan want a divorce. Tom, perhaps thinking I wasn't serious, laughed and said, "Huh? What are you talking about? If you're talking about severing ties, you mean to divorce, right?" I handed the divorce papers to my husband. Then, I gave the divorce papers from Megan. Megan and Amy had already left the house. I wondered where they had gone, and they were preparing this? Fine. We'll divorce. Don't come crying back to me later. I wanted to retort his words, but I decided to keep quiet. After they signed the divorce papers, I decided to leave the house as well. A few days later, Bill and Tom showed up at my parents' house. What's going on? Our factory got absorbed in a merger. You must know something. Bill was furious. Tom added, "Give back our factory. All the employees have disappeared. What will you do?" They yelled loudly. Then, my father made his appearance. Do you two know nothing about my workplace? What do we need to know? You're just the owner of this rundown diner, right? With a laugh, my father said, "This is who I am," and presented a business card. The president of the major metal processing company. Yes. Our company had a weak point, and it was screws. I heard that the business owner and his successor were incompetent. But thanks to the craftsman and Amy, the product quality was excellent. So, we decided to bring it under our company's umbrella. Bill and Tom were stunned. At that point, my father added further to the situation. Now that we've absorbed it, we want to overhaul the management. In simple terms, we'd like the current president and his successor to resign. And we'll bring in a new president. Bill seemed to come back to his senses. It's my factory. You can't just make me resign. Sadly, we don't have the luxury to employ ineffective personnel. We employ skilled and competent people. It's just common sense. Who can do better than us? That's right. Bill and Tom still didn't seem to realize their incompetence. They also hadn't noticed that Megan and Amy were quite skilled. So, my father announced the new president. The new president will be Amy. Wah. Their voices overlapped perfectly. Why Amy? A woman can't possibly handle being a president. However, all the employees have said that if you two remain in charge, they will quit. Without the craftsmen, how do you intend to continue the screw factory? Bill and Tom were left speechless. I really wanted to have a smooth business partnership. But you two ridiculed my wife and this diner, didn't you? Making fun of what my wife has been working so hard for is unforgivable. People who can only look down on others have no foundation for managing a company. The real reason my father was angry was because they made fun of my mother. Moreover, after listening to the grievances of Megan and Amy, he came up with this idea. With Amy becoming the president and Megan supporting her, the employees would return. It turns out the employees were really fond of them. As for the two pitiful men, stripped of their positions as president and successor, they received a small severance pay and were forced out of the screw factory. The two tried to use that severance to start a new business, and chose gambling as the means to multiply it. Even though they'd never engaged in gambling before, they invested all their severance money. Needless to say, they lost it all. Their severance vanished into thin air. Now, both of them are working as temporary staff, but the two, with their remaining high pride, are isolated and don't fit in at their workplaces. On the other hand, with Amy becoming the president, all the employees returned. From now on, they won't just be making existing screws. They are also focusing on developing new screws that can be used in my father's company. Megan is very enthusiastic about it. As for me, I started working at my father's company. I thought it would be good to work there to understand the situation at Amy and Megan's screw factory. Well, on the personal side, I still get along with Megan and Amy, and we regularly have girls' gatherings at my mother's diner. My father also wants to join us, but my mother won't let him. So, he watches us from afar. That's how things have been for us lately. I want to cherish this relationship in the future.